The sound of laughter greeted me as I stepped through the front door, a jarring note of cheer in a space that had once been my sanctuary. I paused, my hand tightening on the keys as I took in the scene before me. Rachel was perched on the edge of the couch, her smile radiant, but not for me. Beside her, Leo sat comfortably, his arm draped casually over the backrest, his confidence practically oozing from every pore. They looked so at ease, so unapologetically smug, that for a moment, I felt like a stranger in my own home. "Noah," Rachel said, her voice filled with a false warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "You're home early." I didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Clearly," I said finally, my tone even. "Should I be apologizing for interrupting?" Leo chuckled, a low, grating sound that made my stomach churn. "No need for that," he said, leaning back as if he owned the place. "In fact, we've been meaning to talk to you." "Have you now?" I asked, crossing the threshold and setting my bag down with deliberate care. "Well, don't let me keep you." Rachel's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Noah, this arrangement isn't working anymore," she said, her tone taking on a rehearsed quality. "Leo and we've decided to move forward together. It's time for you to leave." The words hung in the air, each one cutting deeper than the last. My mind raced, but outwardly, I remained composed. "This house is ours now," she added, gesturing between herself and Leo as if that declaration alone could make it true. I studied them both, noting the way Leo's smirk widened at Rachel's words. He looked so sure of himself, so certain that I'd crumble in the face of their betrayal. And Rachel, with her carefully crafted mask of confidence, seemed equally convinced that I'd simply bow out quietly. "I see," I said slowly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this." Rachel's brow furrowed slightly, perhaps thrown off by my calm demeanor. "Noah, don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's better for everyone if you just go." I nodded, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "You're right. There's no point in making this harder than it needs to be." Leo's smirk widened, and Rachel's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if they both believed they had already won. But they didn't notice the flicker of satisfaction in my eyes, the subtle shift in my expression that hinted at something far more dangerous than submission. "I'll pack my things," I said, turning toward the hallway. "But let me make one thing clear." Rachel and Leo both looked up, their expressions curious. "You'll regret this," I said simply, my voice calm but laced with an edge that made Rachel's smile falter once more. Leo chuckled again, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure. Whatever helps you sleep at night, buddy." I didn't respond, leaving the room without another word. In the privacy of the bedroom, I let out a slow, measured breath, forcing myself to stay composed. The betrayal cut deep, but it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. As I began pulling clothes from the closet, my hand brushed against a hidden panel in the corner. Sliding it open, I revealed the discreet control system I'd installed weeks ago, a precaution I'd taken when I first suspected that Rachel's loyalty was wavering. The system controlled every major function of the house, from the heating and lighting to the reinforced security features I'd added under the guise of home improvement. I activated the control panel on my phone, the screen lighting up with a sleek interface that only I could access. With a few taps, I began setting the groundwork for what was to come. Rachel and Leo thought they had one, but they had no idea what they were up against. Returning to the living room, I carried my packed suitcase and paused in the doorway. "You two enjoy yourselves," I said, my tone light but tinged with something they couldn't quite place. Rachel offered a faint smile, while Leo simply waved dismissively. "Don't worry," he said. "We will." As I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, I glanced back at the house, a flicker of satisfaction crossing my face. They had made their choice and now they would face the consequences. "Let the games begin," I muttered to myself, walking away with the quiet confidence of a man who knew the storm was coming. The atmosphere in the house felt heavy as I moved through the bedroom, methodically packing my belongings. Every item I touched carried a memory, some fond, others bitter. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted in from the living room, where Rachel and Leo were basking in their supposed victory. Their confidence was almost amusing. They had no idea what was coming. I folded my shirts neatly into the suitcase, taking my time. There was no need to rush. Each passing moment was another opportunity for me to solidify my plans. On the bedside table sat my phone, its screen glowing faintly with the interface of the control system I had activated. The quiet hum of its connection to the house's integrated systems was a comforting reminder that I was far from powerless. Rachel's laughter echoed louder, followed by Leo's smug voice. "Can you believe he's just rolling over like this? Makes it too easy." I smirked, zipping up one suitcase and reaching for another. Too easy, indeed. The control panel on my phone displayed the status of the systems I had meticulously installed. Climate control, lighting, water supply, everything was at my fingertips. It had been a quiet project, something I worked on in secret when Rachel's behavior first started to change. Back then, I couldn't pinpoint what was wrong, but I had trusted my instincts. Now, I was grateful I had. With a few swipes, I initiated Phase 1, a gradual temperature drop. Nothing drastic, just a few degrees cooler to unsettle them. The system acknowledged the command with a soft chime, and I glanced toward the doorway. The sound of Leo's voice drifted closer, accompanied by the clinking of ice against glass. "Noah," he called out, his tone mockingly cheerful. "Need a hand? Or are you good?" I stepped into the hallway, suitcase in hand, and met his gaze with a calm expression. "I've got it, thanks." He grinned, leaning against the doorframe with a glass of whiskey in hand. "Gotta admit, I thought you'd put up more of a fight. Makes this a lot less awkward, though, doesn't it?" I didn't rise to the bait, instead shifting my gaze to Rachel, who sat on the couch with an air of casual triumph. "You've made your decision," I said simply. "I'm just respecting it." Rachel's smile faltered briefly, as if my calm demeanor didn't align with her expectations. But she quickly recovered, lifting her glass in a mock toast. "To new beginnings," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I nodded once, then turned back to the bedroom to finish packing. As I folded the last of my clothes, I activated Phase 2, intermittent flickering of the lights. Subtle enough to be dismissed as a minor issue, but consistent enough to plant the seed of unease. The control panel's interface confirmed the change, and I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. When I returned to the living room, my suitcases in tow, the lights dimmed momentarily before returning to full brightness. Rachel and Leo exchanged a quick glance, their expressions puzzled but dismissive. "Guess we'll need to get that checked," Leo muttered, taking another sip of his drink. "I'm sure you'll manage," I said, setting my suitcases near the door. "Everything's packed. I'll be out of your way soon." Rachel leaned back on the couch, a satisfied smirk on her face. "Good. It's for the best, Noah." "Really?" I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "If you say so." As I carried my belongings to the car, I activated Phase 3, subtle disruptions to the water supply. Faucets would sputter, toilets would refuse to flush properly, minor inconveniences that would escalate over time. The control panel's confirmation was a quiet reassurance that the stage was set. Loading the last suitcase into the trunk, I paused to look back at the house. From the outside, it still appeared as it always had, a picture-perfect suburban home. But I knew better. Behind those walls, the systems I had installed were quietly taking control, ready to turn their smug celebration into chaos. Sliding into the driver's seat, I glanced at the control panel one last time before pulling out of the driveway. The flickering lights inside the house were barely noticeable from the street, but I knew Rachel and Leo were already starting to feel the effects. As I drove away, a flicker of satisfaction crossed my face. They thought they had one, but they had no idea what they had unleashed. This was only the beginning, and I had every intention of seeing it through. "Enjoy the house," I muttered to myself, a faint smile playing on my lips. "While you can." Driving away from the house should have felt like a defeat, but as I watched it shrink in my rearview mirror, all I could feel was a growing sense of anticipation. Rachel and Leo might have thought they had one, but they didn't understand what they were up against. Every step I took away from that house was another step toward reclaiming control, and delivering the consequences they so richly deserved. I pulled into a nearby parking lot to take inventory of everything I had packed. My car was loaded with suitcases and boxes, each meticulously filled with items that were unequivocally mine. Years of shared living had taught me the importance of boundaries, and I wasn't about to leave anything behind that could tie me to the chaos about to unfold. Furniture? Let them keep it. Appliances? Those were Rachel's domain anyway. The things I had taken were what mattered most. Documents, sentimental items, my tech equipment, and anything of practical value. Everything else? It was collateral for the storm brewing within those walls. After a quick check of my phone, I initiated the next phase of my plan. The interface for the house's control system glowed softly, a beacon of the power I still held. With a few swipes, I activated a schedule for additional disruptions. The temperature in the house would fluctuate unpredictably, moving from sweltering heat to bone-chilling cold. The lights, already flickering sporadically, would now dim and brighten at irregular intervals. The water supply, set to sputter and stall, would add another layer of frustration to their so-called celebration. Satisfied that everything was in motion, I drove to a storage unit I had rented weeks ago. It was one of many precautions I had taken after first suspecting Rachel's infidelity. The unit was small but secure, filled with backups of important documents and duplicates of any records she might try to access. In the back corner sat a locked chest containing items of irreplaceable value. My father's old watch, a few family heirlooms, and the photographs that told the story of my life before Rachel. I unloaded my belongings methodically, taking care to organize everything in a way that would make the next few weeks easier. This was my headquarters now, the place where I could regroup and plan my next moves. As I locked the unit and stepped back into the evening air, a sense of calm washed over me. The chaos inside the house no longer felt like my burden to bear. It was theirs now. As I drove toward the cabin I had rented, I allowed myself to reflect on the events that had led to this moment. Rachel's betrayal wasn't just an act of infidelity. It was a calculated attempt to take everything from me, my home, my peace of mind, my dignity. But what she hadn't counted on was my ability to anticipate and adapt. Every move she made had only strengthened my resolve. Arriving at the cabin, I unpacked only the essentials: clothes, toiletries, and my laptop. The space was small but cozy, nestled among trees that shielded it from prying eyes. The quiet here was a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the house over the past weeks, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. That night, as I settled into bed, I couldn't resist checking the live feed from the house. The cameras I had discreetly installed provided a front-row seat to the unfolding drama. Rachel and Leo were still in the living room, their smug expressions faltering as the lights flickered more persistently. Leo gestured toward the thermostat, his frustration evident even without sound. Rachel's confident posture was beginning to sag, a shadow of doubt creeping into her features. I watched for a few more minutes, my satisfaction growing with each flicker of the lights and each exasperated glance they exchanged. Then, I closed the laptop and turned off the light, a faint smile on my lips as I drifted off to sleep. This was only the beginning, and they had no idea how much worse it was going to get. The champagne cork popped with a celebratory flourish, echoing through the house that Rachel and Leo now claimed as their own. The two of them laughed, glasses clinking as they toasted to their victory. "To freedom and fresh starts," Rachel said with a smirk, her glass raised high. "To the good life," Leo replied, his grin wide and self-satisfied. The house, however, seemed less inclined to celebrate. Subtle shifts in the environment began almost immediately, though they were too engrossed in their revelry to notice at first. The temperature dropped a few degrees, but they brushed it off as nothing more than the cool night air creeping in. "We should get the thermostat checked," Leo muttered as he pulled a blanket over his legs, settling further into the couch. Rachel nodded absently, more focused on pouring herself another glass. But as the evening wore on, the minor inconveniences began to pile up. The lights flickered sporadically, disrupting the warm glow of the living room. The television lost its signal intermittently, filling the space with static that grated on their nerves. Leo cursed under his breath, fumbling with the remote to no avail. "What's going on with this thing?" he grumbled, slapping the side of the television. "Didn't Noah just replace this a few months ago?" Rachel shrugged, a faint irritation creeping into her voice. "It's probably just a bad connection. We'll call someone tomorrow." As she spoke, the sound of water running echoed from the kitchen. Rachel furrowed her brow and stood to investigate, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. When she reached the sink, she found the faucet gushing scalding water, steam rising in thick plumes. "Leo, did you leave this running?" she called out, her tone sharp. Leo appeared in the doorway, frowning. "Why would I do that?" he asked, crossing his arms. Rachel twisted the handle to turn it off, but the water continued to flow, the heat making it impossible to touch. She grabbed a dish towel to shield her hand and managed to shut it off with some effort. "This house is falling apart already," she muttered, frustration coloring her words. "I thought you said this was a good idea." "It was a good idea," Leo snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You're the one who wanted to throw a party before we even got settled." Rachel glared at him but said nothing, returning to the couch with her champagne glass. The tension between them was palpable now, the earlier triumph fading as the house seemed to conspire against them. The thermostat beeped from the hallway, drawing their attention. Leo walked over to check it, muttering curses under his breath. When he reached the device, he saw the temperature had dropped to 50 degrees. His fingers flew across the buttons as he tried to reset it, but the display blinked mockingly before shutting off completely. "Great," he growled, throwing his hands up. "The damn thing's broken. What else is going to go wrong?" Rachel said, her voice rising in frustration. "I thought you said Noah wouldn't be a problem, that he'd just leave quietly." Leo turned to her, his jaw tightening. "And he did. This has nothing to do with him. It's just bad timing." Rachel's response was cut off by the sudden sound of creaking floorboards overhead. Both of them froze, their eyes darting to the ceiling. "Did you hear that?" Rachel whispered. Leo nodded, his expression hardening. "Probably just the house settling." The noise came again, louder this time. It sounded like deliberate footsteps, each one heavier than the last. Rachel clutched her glass tighter, her knuckles whitening. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Leo grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and headed toward the staircase. "I'll check it out. Stay here." Rachel watched him ascend the stairs, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness. She sat in uneasy silence, every creak and groan of the house amplifying her anxiety. When Leo returned 10 minutes later, his face was pale. "There's nothing up there," he said, his voice unconvincing. "Just the wind or something." Rachel didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the champagne bottle now sitting forgotten on the table. The celebration had turned sour, and an unspoken tension settled between them. Neither wanted to admit it, but they were beginning to realize the house wasn't theirs to control, not in the way they had hoped. As the night dragged on, the disruptions continued. The lights flickered more violently, the water sputtered unpredictably, and the temperature continued to drop. By the time they finally went to bed, the thrill of their supposed victory had been thoroughly extinguished. They lay in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, as the house seemed to breathe around them, alive with a presence they couldn't understand. Far away, in the cozy cabin I now called home, I watched the live feed from my laptop, sipping a glass of wine. Rachel and Leo had wanted the house so badly, and now it was theirs. Every flicker of light, every burst of scalding water, every creak of the floorboards was a reminder that they had underestimated me. "How's that fresh start treating you?" I muttered, a faint smile playing on my lips as I closed the laptop and turned in for the night. The games had only just begun. The following morning, Rachel and Leo awoke to a house that seemed colder and darker than they remembered. The thermostat was unresponsive, the lights were dim, and a strange, oppressive silence hung in the air. They exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing, each silently hoping the other would dismiss the mounting tension. Leo wandered into the kitchen to make coffee, only to find the faucet sputtering before releasing a jet of scalding hot water that splashed onto his hand. He yelped, jerking back and clutching his reddened skin. "What now?" Rachel called from the living room, irritation creeping into her voice. "The damn water's acting up again," Leo muttered, running his hand under cold water from the bathroom sink. At least that faucet was behaving, for now. Rachel sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, only to find that the Wi-Fi was out. She groaned and tossed the device onto the coffee table. "We need to call someone to fix this place. Nothing works." Leo appeared in the doorway, his patience visibly fraying. "Yeah, let's add that to the list of things Noah apparently didn't bother to maintain. This house is falling apart." But deep down, they both knew better. This wasn't just wear and tear. Something about the house felt wrong, almost as if it were alive and angry. As the day wore on, the unsettling occurrences became impossible to ignore. The lights flickered more aggressively, plunging rooms into brief moments of total darkness. Doors that had been left open slammed shut without warning, the sound echoing through the house like a warning shot. The water in the showers alternated between freezing cold and scalding hot, forcing Rachel and Leo to abandon their attempts to freshen up. By late afternoon, the tension between them had reached a boiling point. "Did you mess with the thermostat?" Rachel snapped, her arms crossed as she glared at Leo. "Why would I mess with it?" Leo shot back. "It's probably just broken, like everything else in this house." Rachel scoffed. "Great. So, what, we just freeze to death while you wait for it to magically fix itself?" Before Leo could respond, a low, guttural noise reverberated through the walls, cutting through their argument like a knife. They both froze, their eyes darting around the room as the sound grew louder, shifting from a deep hum to what sounded like faint whispers. "What the hell is that?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "It's probably just the pipes," Leo said, though he didn't sound convinced. The whispers faded, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Rachel and Leo remained rooted in place, their breaths shallow as they strained to hear any further disturbances. When nothing else happened, they exchanged nervous glances and tried to dismiss it. But the house wasn't done with them. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, the lights in the dining room began to flicker again. This time, they didn't stop. The bulbs buzzed angrily before exploding in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into darkness. Rachel screamed, and Leo jumped to his feet, knocking over his chair. "That's it," he growled, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen. "I'm checking the breaker box." He stormed down to the basement, leaving Rachel alone in the darkened dining room. The silence pressed in around her, broken only by the faint creak of floorboards overhead. She hugged herself tightly, her earlier bravado completely gone. In the basement, Leo shone the flashlight over the breaker box, muttering curses under his breath. Everything looked normal, but when he tried to reset the switches, the lights remained stubbornly off. Frustrated, he turned to leave, only to find the basement door had swung shut behind him. He tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Rachel!" he shouted, pounding on the door. "The door's stuck. Let me out." Upstairs, Rachel heard his muffled shouts but didn't move. She was frozen in place, her eyes fixed on the living room, where the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. Her heart pounded as one of the shadows coalesced into a vaguely human shape, standing motionless just beyond the doorway. "Leo!" she called out, her voice shaking. There was no response, just the sound of her own rapid breathing and the faint hum of the house's systems. In the basement, Leo's frustration turned to panic as the air grew colder. His breath came out in visible puffs, and the faint sound of whispering began again, this time closer. He spun around, shining the flashlight wildly, but the beam revealed nothing but empty space. "Rachel!" he screamed, his voice cracking. Upstairs, Rachel finally snapped out of her paralysis and ran to the basement door. She yanked it open, and Leo stumbled out, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave," he said, grabbing her arm. "Now." But as they turned toward the front door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang, the locks clicking into place. The house groaned around them, its walls seeming to pulse with life. Rachel and Leo clung to each other, their earlier confidence replaced by raw, unfiltered terror. The house was no longer just a building. It was a predator, and they were its prey. Desperation had taken hold of Rachel and Leo by the time they stumbled into the kitchen. Their nerves frayed and their confidence shattered. The house seemed to breathe around them, its presence oppressive and unrelenting. The walls vibrated with a low hum, and the occasional creak of the floorboards above made them jump. Leo rifled through the drawers, searching for anything that might give them a clue about what was happening. Rachel paced back and forth, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her gaze darted toward every shadow, every flicker of movement, as though expecting something to leap out at her. "What are you even looking for?" she snapped, her voice shaking. Leo didn't respond immediately. His hands froze as he opened the final drawer. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly and placed dead center. He hesitated for a moment before picking it up, his breath catching as he unfolded it. The message was handwritten in Noah's unmistakable script. "Enjoy your stay. I made sure this house would be unforgettable, for you both." Rachel leaned over his shoulder to read the note, her face blanching as the meaning sank in. "It's him," she whispered. "Noah. He's doing this." "But how?" Leo demanded, crumpling the note in his fist. "He's gone. He left. How could he still have control over the house?" Rachel shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here. Now." Leo grabbed her arm, leading her to the front door. He yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The locks were engaged, and no amount of force would make them give. Frustrated, he moved to a window, intending to break it, but when he slammed the heel of his hand against the glass, it didn't even crack. The window felt solid, reinforced, as if it were designed to withstand exactly this kind of escape attempt. "This can't be real," he muttered, his voice rising with panic. "Noah's messing with us. He's got to be messing with us." Rachel backed away from the window, her hands trembling. "We're trapped," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's planned everything." The low hum in the walls grew louder, punctuated by the sound of doors slamming upstairs. Leo ran his hands through his hair, his composure unraveling. Rachel sank into a chair, her head in her hands, as the weight of their situation became impossible to ignore. "Think," Leo said, pacing back and forth. "There's got to be a way out. A control panel, a fuse box, something?" Rachel lifted her head, her expression hollow. "He said he made this house unforgettable," she murmured. "What if he's watching us? What if he's still here somehow?" Leo stopped pacing, his face hardening. "If he's watching, then he's getting exactly what he wants. We're not giving him the satisfaction." But even as he said it, the house seemed to mock him. The lights dimmed until the room was cloaked in near darkness, and the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. They weren't just noises now. They were words, fragmented and chilling. "Get out," Rachel screamed, covering her ears. Leo grabbed a chair and hurled it across the room, his anger boiling over. The chair shattered against the wall, the sound reverberating through the house. "Enough," he shouted. "You hear me, Noah? Enough?" The whispers stopped abruptly, plunging the house into a suffocating silence. Leo's chest heaved as he glared at the walls, as though daring them to respond. Rachel remained frozen in her seat, tears streaming down her face. "He's not going to stop," she said softly. "He wants us to suffer." Leo turned to her, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. "Then we'll make him stop. We'll find a way." But as they stood there, the house seemed to come alive again. The walls creaked, the floors shuddered, and the air filled with an oppressive, almost tangible energy. It was as if the house itself was responding to their defiance, tightening its grip on them. Leo and Rachel realized in that moment that they weren't just facing Noah's carefully laid plans. They were at the mercy of a house that had become their prison, a place designed to break them piece by piece. And there was no escape. The air inside the house had grown thick, almost stifling, as Rachel and Leo spiraled further into panic. Every attempt to regain control had been met with failure. The house, or rather, Noah's intricate system, seemed to anticipate their every move, cutting off each avenue of escape as quickly as they discovered it. Rachel paced the living room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, while Leo sat on the edge of the couch, his head in his hands. The whispers that had haunted them earlier were gone, but the oppressive silence that replaced them was somehow worse. It felt like the house was watching, waiting for its next move. "We have to do something," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "We can't just sit here and let this happen." Leo lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "What do you suggest, Rachel?" he snapped. "We've tried the doors, the windows, the breaker box. Nothing works. We're trapped." Rachel flinched at the venom in his tone, but refused to back down. "There has to be a way out," she insisted. "What about the basement? Maybe there's something down there Noah didn't think to lock up?" Leo hesitated, his jaw tightening. The thought of going back into the basement, where the air had grown unnaturally cold and the whispers seemed to originate, made his stomach churn. But Rachel's desperate expression left him no choice. "Fine," he said, standing abruptly. "Let's check the basement. But if there's nothing down there, we need to focus on conserving our energy. Whatever's going on here, it's not going to kill us. It's just Noah trying to scare us." Rachel nodded, though the fear in her eyes betrayed her lack of conviction. Together, they made their way to the basement door, which creaked ominously as Leo pushed it open. The staircase stretched into darkness, the single bulb overhead flickering weakly. "Stay close," Leo muttered, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen counter before descending the stairs. Rachel followed, clutching the railing with trembling hands. The basement was even colder than they remembered. Their breath came out in visible puffs, and the concrete floor felt like ice beneath their feet. Leo swept the flashlight across the room, revealing shelves lined with tools and storage boxes. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than an ordinary basement, but the oppressive atmosphere made it impossible to relax. "Look around for anything that seems out of place," Leo said, his voice low. Rachel moved to a corner of the room, sifting through a stack of boxes. She found old photo albums, holiday decorations, and other mundane items. Nothing that could help them escape. Frustrated, she slammed the lid of one box shut, the sound echoing through the basement. "There's nothing here," she said, her voice cracking. "This was a waste of time." "Keep looking," Leo snapped, shining the flashlight toward the far wall. "Noah wouldn't just leave us without options. He's trying to mess with our heads. There has to be something here." As he spoke, the light caught a faint glimmer near the base of the wall. Leo crouched down, his heart pounding as he realized it was a small, metallic panel. He pried it open, revealing a series of wires and switches. "What is it?" Rachel asked, hurrying to his side. "It's a control panel," Leo said, his voice tinged with both hope and apprehension. This might be how he's controlling everything. He studied the panel, trying to make sense of the wiring. It was far more complex than anything he had encountered before, with labels and switches that seemed deliberately cryptic. His hands shook as he reached for one of the switches. "Wait," Rachel said, grabbing his arm. "What if flipping the wrong switch makes things worse?" Leo hesitated, her words giving him pause. But the growing sense of claustrophobia, the feeling that the walls themselves were closing in, spurred him on. "We don't have a choice," he said, flipping the first switch. Nothing happened. He flipped another, and then another, each time expecting a reaction. But the house remained silent, its systems unmoved by his attempts to wrest back control. Frustration boiled over, and Leo slammed his fist against the panel. "Damn it," he shouted. "What does he want from us?" As if in response, the basement lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness. Rachel screamed, grabbing onto Leo as the whispers returned, louder and more distinct than ever. They surrounded them, filling the air with chilling words that seemed to seep into their very bones. "You shouldn't have stayed." Rachel clung to Leo, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. "We have to get out of here," she choked out. "I don't care how, but we have to get out." Leo nodded, though he had no idea how to make that happen. The house had become a prison, its walls imbued with Noah's calculated malice. As they stumbled back up the stairs, their panic mounting with every step, they realized the truth. This wasn't just a battle of wills. It was a game they were never meant to win. The house had turned from a prison to a battleground. Rachel and Leo, once smug and confident, were now shadows of their former selves, desperately clawing for escape. The temperature fluctuated wildly, plunging them into freezing cold one moment and suffocating heat the next. The lights flickered erratically, casting ghostly shadows across the walls that seemed to close in on them. Rachel's breathing was labored as she stumbled into the kitchen, clutching the countertop for support. "Leo," she gasped, her voice raw from screaming. "We have to get out. I can't. I can't take this anymore." Leo, equally disheveled, appeared in the doorway, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "I'm trying," he snapped, though his voice lacked its usual edge. It was clear he was as lost as she was. "The windows won't break. The doors won't open. It's like this place is alive." Rachel turned to face him, her eyes wide with terror. "What does he want from us?" she whispered. "Why is he doing this?" Before Leo could respond, the floor beneath them trembled violently, nearly knocking them off their feet. The low hum that had haunted them for days rose to a deafening roar, and the house seemed to vibrate with rage. Rachel screamed as the walls began to crack, jagged lines snaking across the paint like veins. "It's the gas," Leo shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "We have to." But his words were cut short as a loud hiss erupted from the vents. A thick, acrid smoke poured into the room, stinging their eyes and filling their lungs. Rachel fell to her knees, coughing violently, while Leo stumbled toward the door, clawing at the handle in vain. "Noah!" Rachel cried out, her voice a desperate plea. "Please stop this. We're sorry. Just let us go." There was no response, only the relentless hum of the house's systems. The lights flickered one last time before plunging them into darkness, leaving only the sound of their ragged breaths and the hiss of the gas filling the room. Leo collapsed beside Rachel, his strength failing him as the fumes took their toll. He reached for her hand, their fingers brushing in a final, futile gesture of solidarity. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice barely audible. "This is my fault." Rachel's tears mixed with the sweat on her face as she squeezed his hand weakly. "We shouldn't have," she began, but her words trailed off as her body went limp. The house fell silent. The hum faded, the cracks in the walls ceased their spread, and the oppressive heat and cold dissipated. The gas vents closed with a quiet hiss, leaving the room eerily still. Rachel and Leo lay motionless on the kitchen floor, their once smug demeanor replaced by lifeless expressions. Miles away, in a cozy cabin nestled in the woods, Noah watched the live feed from his laptop. His face was calm, almost serene, as he sipped a cup of coffee. The screen displayed the now silent house, its systems finally at rest. "You wanted it so badly," he muttered to himself, his voice soft but laced with bitterness. "Now it's all yours." He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, the faintest hint of a smile playing on his lips. The house had done its job, and Noah had no intention of looking back. Rachel and Leo had taken everything from him, but in the end, it was they who paid the ultimate price. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, signaling the start of a new day. For Noah, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one free from betrayal and the ghosts of the past. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of the fireplace, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold precision of what had just unfolded. Noah sat at the small wooden table, his laptop open in front of him, displaying the live feed from the house. The cameras, discreetly placed and flawlessly integrated into the home's infrastructure, offered a clear view of every room. He could see Rachel and Leo lying motionless on the kitchen floor, the house now eerily silent. Noah took a slow sip of his coffee, the bitterness grounding him as he stared at the screen. It was done. The storm of betrayal, humiliation, and anger that had consumed him for months had finally reached its crescendo. Yet, as he watched the aftermath, he didn't feel the elation he'd imagined. Satisfaction, yes, but it was tempered by an undeniable sadness. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a long, measured breath. The house had been his masterpiece, a meticulous blend of technology and strategy designed to give Rachel and Leo exactly what they deserved. Every flickering light, every chilling whisper, every malfunction had been orchestrated to unnerve them, to strip away their smug confidence piece by piece. And it had worked. By the end, they were broken, their arrogance replaced with raw, desperate fear. But now that it was over, Noah couldn't help but reflect on how it had come to this. He'd loved Rachel once, deeply and without reservation. He'd built that house for her, filling it with every comfort and convenience she could want. It had been a symbol of their life together, a tangible representation of his devotion. To see it become a battleground for her betrayal was a bitter irony. "You could have had everything," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. But it wasn't enough, was it? The screen flickered as the feed cycled through the different camera angles. The living room, the bedroom, the hallway, all empty now, save for the echoes of what had transpired. The sight of the house, so still and lifeless, brought a pang of regret that Noah hadn't anticipated. He'd won, but the victory felt hollow. Closing the laptop, Noah stood and walked to the window. The view outside was serene, the forest bathed in the soft light of early morning. Birds chirped in the distance, their song a stark contrast to the chaos he'd left behind. This cabin had been his refuge, a place to escape the noise and regroup. It had become a sanctuary where he could plan his next move, free from the weight of Rachel's betrayal. As he stared out at the trees, a question lingered in his mind. Was it worth it? The months of planning, the intricate setup, the constant surveillance, all to deliver justice to two people who had wronged him. They'd taken everything from him, but in the process, he'd been forced to confront parts of himself he hadn't known existed. The quiet rage, the capacity for calculated revenge, these weren't traits he'd ever associated with himself. "Maybe that's the real betrayal," he said softly, his breath fogging the glass. "What they made me become." He turned back to the table, his gaze falling on the closed laptop. The authorities would find the house soon enough. He'd made sure of that. The systems were programmed to reset, wiping away any trace of his involvement. To them, it would look like a tragic accident, a malfunctioning smart home system that had spiraled out of control. Rachel and Leo's deaths would be ruled an unfortunate coincidence, leaving Noah free to move on. And he would move on. This chapter of his life, as dark and twisted as it had become, was over. The house, once a symbol of love and devotion, would now be remembered as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when trust is betrayed and love is taken for granted. Noah grabbed his coat and stepped outside, the crisp morning air biting at his skin. The forest felt alive around him, the sounds and scents grounding him in the present. He took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. "It's time," he said, his voice steady. "Time to start over." With one last glance at the cabin, he walked toward his car, a faint smile playing on his lips. The past was behind him now, and for the first time in months, the future felt like something worth looking forward to. Noah stood in the middle of an empty house, his hands resting on his hips as he took in the space. The floors were polished, the walls freshly painted, and the sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting warm patterns on the ground. It was nothing like the house he had left behind, the house that had witnessed betrayal, anger, and a calculated revenge. This place was new, untouched by the weight of his past. It was his clean slate. The real estate agent appeared in the doorway, her clipboard in hand and a bright smile on her face. "Everything's finalized, Mr. Carter. The keys are yours." Noah turned to her, his expression calm but content. "Thank you. I appreciate all your help." She handed him the keys, and for a moment, he stood there, the cool metal pressing against his palm. It felt symbolic, a tangible representation of his fresh start. He gave the agent a polite nod as she excused herself, leaving him alone in the house that now belonged entirely to him. Walking through the rooms, Noah let his mind wander. The layout was simple, unpretentious, and practical. Each step felt like shedding a layer of the emotional baggage he had carried for so long. Here, there were no memories of Rachel's laughter turning into scorn, no echoes of Leo's smug taunts, no hidden control panels waiting to unleash chaos. This was a place where he could simply be. He made his way to the living room and sank onto the couch he'd ordered a week ago, its soft cushions a welcome comfort. Pulling out his phone, he scrolled through emails and messages from friends and family, all of whom had supported him in the aftermath of his separation. They didn't know the full extent of what had happened, and they didn't need to. To them, he was simply a man who had weathered a difficult divorce and come out stronger on the other side. One message caught his eye, a simple text from his sister, "Proud of you. Can't wait to visit your new place." He smiled, typing out a quick response, "Thanks. You're welcome anytime." As he set the phone aside, his thoughts drifted back to the house he'd left behind. He knew the authorities had found Rachel and Leo's bodies by now. The reports would rule it a tragic accident, a faulty smart home system leading to a catastrophic failure. There was no trace of his involvement, no evidence linking him to the events that had unfolded. He had planned it meticulously, ensuring that his hands would remain clean. And yet, the memory of what he'd done lingered, not as a burden, but as a lesson. He'd learned the hard way that trust could be fragile, that love could turn to betrayal in the blink of an eye. But he'd also discovered his own strength, his ability to take control of a situation and ensure that justice was served. It wasn't a path he'd ever imagined taking, but it had brought him to this moment, a moment of peace. Rising from the couch, Noah wandered out to the backyard. The garden was small but full of potential, with a patch of earth waiting to be cultivated. He knelt down, running his fingers through the soil, and smiled to himself. He'd plant something here, flowers, maybe, or a vegetable patch. Something to nurture, to grow. It felt fitting, a quiet symbol of the new life he was building. As the afternoon light began to fade, Noah returned inside and stood at the window, gazing out at the quiet neighborhood. The weight that had pressed on him for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of lightness he hadn't felt in years. This house, this life, was his. Free from betrayal, free from anger, free from the ghosts of the past. He thought about Rachel and Leo one last time, not with bitterness or regret, but with clarity. They had made their choices, and so had he. Now, those choices belonged to the past, and he had no intention of letting them dictate his future. Turning away from the window, Noah walked to the kitchen and began unpacking boxes. Plates, glasses, utensils, all the small, mundane things that made a house a home. He worked steadily, each item finding its place, until the room felt warm and lived in. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it was enough. It was his. Later that evening, as he sat at the dining table with a simple meal and a glass of wine, Noah allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought him here, to this clean slate. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. Raising his glass to no one in particular, he murmured, "Here's to new beginnings." And as he took a sip, the faintest smile crossed his face. The past was behind him, and the future was wide open, waiting to be written.